Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you're a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution podcast with John DiJulius. Filling in for John today is Dave Murray, Senior Customer Experience Consultant for the DiJulius Group. Today, Dave sits down with Jack Mackey, listed in the Who's Who of Customer Experience and founding member of the Customer Experience Professionals Association. In this week's episode, Jack helps us understand how to create remarkable new experiences by solving, not selling, and making it easy for your customers to buy from you, by engaging human to human, and by teaching through stories. Now here's your host, Dave Murray.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Murray, and I am the Senior Experience Consultant for the DiJulius Group. And I am thrilled to have you join us for today's episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. Today, I am thrilled to have Jack Mackey join us, a longtime friend of mine and the DiJulius Group, and also a no stranger to the Customer Service Revolution, our conference that is held every fall in Cleveland, Ohio. He's been to several. He's spoken before. He's going to be speaking again this year. He's going to have some great things to share. A couple of things that I want to point out to you to pay attention for in this particular episode, which I think you'll find very, very interesting. First, Jack's going to talk about the science of service management as defined by Harvard. That's where we're going to start. Then we're going to talk about the difference between customer service and customer experience. What truly is the difference between those two terms? Then we're going to talk about how closely linked sales, service, and loyalty really are. And are you looking at it that way in your business, that linkage between those three important terms? And we're also going to talk about three very important questions that you should be asking yourself about the service you're delivering in your business. And if you're not asking these questions, you're going to want to start after you hear this. And something that I found really fascinating in our conversation, Jack's going to talk about why a traditional loyalty program, as we know them as consumers, why a traditional loyalty program is not the best way to build loyalty with your customers. As a matter of fact, it's probably not a good place to start. So a fascinating conversation with Jack, and let's get right to it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jack Mackey. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. I am thrilled to be joined, as I mentioned earlier, by Jack Mackey. Jack is a consultant, a keynote speaker, and we'll get to that in just a minute because he draws rave reviews. And so if you're coming to the Customer Service Revolution conference this fall, you are going to want to see Jack and seek him out and meet him. The other thing is, I know we're going to talk in this episode a little bit about sales and service and how they're different, yet they both support each other. And I was just mentioning to Jack off the air, one of the things I admire most about him, and I've known Jack for a while now, seeing him attend the Customer Service Revolution as an attendee, as a speaker in the past, is that he is such a relationship builder. It's just truly something he does so well, and I've always kind of admired that from afar, and I got the chance to tell him that earlier today as we were starting. So Jack, thanks for making the time to be here today on our podcast, and thanks for coming to the Customer Service Revolution this fall. I'm excited to see you on stage.
I really look forward to being back. I've loved all my experiences there, Dave, and you just attract phenomenal people and love being with all of you.
Well, great. And you add so much when you come. So I'm thrilled that you're going to be here this fall. So here's where I want to start, Jack. I want to kind of take people through your evolution of your career and what you've done, because you've done so many really cool things. And where I wanted to start was with SMG. Because I think that when it comes to service, what you all were doing at SMG and then what you learned as you were going throughout your role at SMG really tells us so much about service and what's successful. So first, can you give our viewers and our listeners a little background on SMG and your role while you were there?
Sure. And it's interesting too, because that's exactly how I met John.
Right.
SMG hired John to speak at our client conference, and it was early in John's career, and he had the huge challenge of following Tom Peters as a speaker at our client conference. And he just blew everybody away. He was a huge discovery for us and for all of our clients, many of whom have actually hired the DiJulius Group. And so that was a great way that we met. And in addition to that, I'll tell you about SMG a little bit more in detail, but I want to get right to the fact that we liked what he said so much that then John wanted to do a workshop for us on how to create a B2B extraordinary service experience. And so we learned a lot from John right off the bat. And I'll tell you why it made so much difference at SMG. So SMG stands for Service Management Group, and it comes out of a research project at the Harvard Business School. A number of professors, including Len Schlesinger, who was the dean of the school at the time, spent about 5 years trying to figure out what was the difference between service management and the management of factories and utilities and all the other types of managements that there were. And service management had not become a separate science, really, until Harvard decided that if they're going to mint MBAs in the future, those MBAs needed to know how to deliver service. So they did this research program, and they talked especially to retailers. And that's where they started. And as a result of that, they made a lot of discoveries, and there was a whole framework for service management and how that connected to financial results. And so that turned into a business. And our partner in that business was actually Len Schlesinger from Harvard Business School. And then Bill and Andy Fromm were entrepreneurs in Kansas City who had specialized in retail advertising. So they knew a lot about retail. And they had found out that they would do advertising and it would attract a whole lot of new customers. And then their clients would often complain, once we stopped advertising, we never saw those clients again. I said, well, if you haven't got something worth coming back to experience, then advertising is not nearly as effective. So then they decided to found a department within their organization that was called SMG, Service Management Group, and it helped clients understand how their customers perceive the experience. Because no sense to drive people into your business if they don't want to come back after they experience it.
Absolutely. So if I understand correctly, the primary business, at least the initial model, was really trying to find those results, trying to find those metrics, engaging the results. And is that how SMG started? And then it started to morph into more as far as showing people how to get there, right? How to deliver that experience. But did it really start with the measurements?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It started with research, and then it evolved into research that could be turned into a tool that could be used not at corporate headquarters, but right down to the individual location. And we served restaurants, retail, grocery stores, convenience stores. So they all came down to the performance of the individual location. But the model that they developed at Harvard, they set out to prove, does it really matter if the customers think the experience is better or terrific or whatever terms people use, colloquially? And they discovered that the most effective measure, I guess you could say, was overall satisfaction. This is back in the early 2000s, the late 90s. Overall satisfaction. And overall satisfaction then had a direct correlation to intent to recommend. And intent to recommend had the most direct relationship with sales growth and referrals. And so over time, as everybody probably in the audience will know, this whole NPS thing emerged where a lot of people just started skipping overall satisfaction and asking, would you be willing to recommend us? Because the recommend question ties directly to financial performance. So that's how we got started. We learned how to, ask the right questions, analyze, just the same as we asked customers what they felt. We would combine that with operational performance. So for example, in restaurants measure speed, drive-through speed. So they would combine their drive-through speed with the customer perceptions of the experience, which was highly influenced by the drive-through speed. And so they could figure out really fast, friendly and fast is better than just fast. And fast alone will not make up for not being friendly, but it was that combination of friendly and fast in drive-through restaurants that helped them get better.
Got it. Yeah, so interesting. So then from that, as an organization, you really started to track trends and find ways to help your clients achieve those metrics, right? To achieve that friendly, not just tell them that you need to be friendly and fast, but how to actually achieve that friendly in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Dave, because a lot of people in the restaurant and retail businesses back in the late 90s and early 2000s, they sort of knew it was important to have, quote, good service, but they didn't really have any financial proof of that. And it was hard to get buy-in from managers. And if managers don't really buy in, well, the employees aren't. So that's where I got the chief evangelist title from. They need people to actually, light a fire and create some excitement. And in business, that excitement had better include financial performance. Because if the best managers in the company are the ones that deliver the best financial performance, and I can show you how in your district, your area, or your individual store, you can improve your financial performance, and you won't have to depend on the company's advertising plan, then that people get excited about that. And when they get excited about it, the managers, then, now the employees are excited about it. And so that's how the process evolved from kind of a framework. Wow, this is really important. You can't run a business today that's in service without doing a good job of it. And we can prove it with analysis and insights from what customers say, combined with financial performance, sales growth, number of referrals, retention rates, things like that.
You brought up an interesting point, Jack, when you talked about some of the industries that were really kind of in SMG's sweet spot, if you will, the industries that you were working in. And, what I hear in our consulting business at the DiJulius Group a lot is I'll hear people say, that's not going to work for us. We do X, Y, Z, and they don't care about service. They just want low price or whatever it is, whatever they feel their key metrics are. And so I'm just curious, we always tell people, if you have customers, you need to focus on your service. Somewhere along the line, somewhere along the chain, service is important. And that client retention and all those things you just mentioned are based on that. So I'm just curious if you face that a lot in the early going with SMG, and then if the fact that you were focused so closely on the metrics and the numbers, if you helped really build that case to turn people into understanding the importance.
Well, you're right. SMG, as I said, the founders were experts in retail. Retail and restaurant are highly correlated. So those were our first two big areas. And then eventually that naturally went to convenience stores and grocery stores. And even now, I believe, and I've been away from SMG for several years now, but now the patient experience is even something that they focus on.
Yep.
So what happened, I think, that changed everything was the competition got so good that it was really hard to distinguish yourself. And one of the few things left that you could do that wasn't easy to copy was to deliver what I call a loyalty inspiring customer experience. So once you have the research model behind it, and you know what kind of experiences create loyalty, then let's just be straightforward about it. We're trying to create loyalty inspiring customer experiences. No matter what business you're in, Dave, would you like to have loyal customers? And the answer is yeah, of course you would. And then it got to the point where you almost couldn't even compete if you could not deliver a loyalty inspiring customer experience, because there's so much competition. And your brand goes up for election every day. Your location goes up for election every day. And I think we all know from experience as consumers, and even those of us that buy business experiences, that it doesn't take much to cause you to say, hey, I can do better than this. These guys don't seem to care that much about my business, so I'm not going to care that much about theirs. So I used to put it this way: millions and millions and billions of dollars have been spent trying to understand what makes customers come back, what makes them stay. And now that we understand that, and we learned it first in the hospitality industry, but once we learned that, it became provable in almost every other industry that unless you sold a pure commodity where it was customers that bought a whole ton of it could just save a bunch of money buying it from you because you were a big producer. But most other businesses that serve services, they absolutely have to be competitive in order to be a relevant player today.
Absolutely. It's so important. So I want to focus on your business today, Jack, because now you are out there as a highly regarded keynote speaker. If anyone goes to your website and sees some of your footage and some of the organizations you work with and their feedback, it's tremendous. You go in there and really energize a crowd and get them excited about building loyalty. So my question for you is, you're out there now helping organizations get from service to loyalty. And so I'm just curious, your opinion in seeing organizations and working with organizations, how big of a step is that? How hard of a process is it to go from service to loyal customers?
Well, let me explain it this way. The title that I frequently use for my keynote speech is called What Customers Love. Hmm. And the reason that I came up with that title is that I discovered that, take away research language, and what we really want is we want our customers to love us, and we want our employees to love us. And so that's kind of a simple way of saying that the difference between a customer service and customer experience is feelings, it's emotion, it's how you feel about an organization after you interact with them. I remember when my son was old enough to get one of his first jobs, he worked at a computer store, and they literally had a department called customer service. But you know what it really was, Dave? Customer complaint department.
Yes.
And this is why back in early days, being in customer service was not all that highly regarded. It was kind of the bottom of the chain. You'd set up some poor young man or woman like my kid, and you'd put him behind a desk, and every time somebody had a problem with their product, they would bring this computer in and they'd complain about it. He'd write down everything that was wrong with it, try to be nice to them. But it was not a rewarding job. No. And so, as I said, though, over time, the quality of products got so much better. And the way that happened was the same things that we do in service, which is get customer feedback on how they feel about the experience, is the quality movement started back in the 80s about getting customers feedback on how they felt about their products. And that's how it all developed. So this service management is simply an extension of quality management. And as a result of that, we just found that people, no matter what business is in an audience, if it's about what customers love, they're going to want to hear examples. They're going to want to hear stories that I can tell without violating client confidentiality, and examples that maybe they've experienced themselves, but they didn't know what was behind it. So that's how I sort of try to get people's engagement in the topic, is by just using illustrations of companies that they knock customers out. And how do they do that? How do they get employees to behave that way? What are their secrets, if you will? And it always ends up just being, that operational excellence is not a secret, but it requires a whole lot of specific actions and programs and methods of doing business that make you different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So true. And what I find in our consulting business at the DiJulius Group, and I'm sure you find this too when you're speaking to organizations, Jack, is that unfortunately for us as consumers, too many organizations don't take the time to focus on service, right? They hope they have great service, but they don't take enough time to put a plan into place as to what that is. Mm-hmm. And so I really think that that's the first step, is defining what we want our good service to look like. And then as you're speaking, then the next step is, okay, how do we turn that into loyal customers? How do we make them wanting more from what we're delivering?
Right. It's interesting too, because after we met John at SMG, John walked us through a process where we essentially looked at the customer journey in a way that said, at what point could we be different and better than other people that provide the kinds of research and consulting and analytical services that we provided? And from that, a whole bunch of great ideas came out. And many of them, our people were so good and so focused on the customers. And they were also great relationship builders. So they did a lot of cool things. But by getting everybody in a room, we found out, wow, you're doing that, and you're doing that, and I'm doing this. Now, if we both learn from each other, we keep our good habits and we adopt even better new ones, then over the years, the company just got better and better and more famous. I think Forrester, evaluates all these companies that measure customer experiences. Mm-hmm. And SMG just recently, if I'm not mistaken, they were the only customer experience management company that ever has been awarded Forrester's highest rating for professional services and management services. So that's my personal experience with it. And people in the audiences, no matter what business they're in, this idea of, hey, let us describe how other companies have become so well known for great service, what they've done, what they've discovered, and then go back to yourselves and say, look, you just can't copy what other people do and still be different. But you can copy a lot of the processes that people do to evaluate their service and make sure that they can make it different and better year after year than the competition.
Dave and Jack are two of our many speakers at this year's Customer Service Revolution Conference. Join us and hundreds of other innovative customer experience enthusiasts at the 2021 Customer Service Revolution Conference this October in Cleveland, Ohio. Tickets are now available at customerservicerevolution.com.
I had a comment on the process that you spoke of that you went through as part of SMG with John, which we call creating your customer experience cycle. So creating those touch points. And to me, one of the things that is so valuable with that workshop and that process, and you're speaking to it right now, is it's an organization taking some time to really focus on the experience they're delivering and moving away from just the traditional operational, but also saying, where can we add some experiential touches? And sometimes they could be as small as using that customer's name and building rapport. But the thing that I love about the workshop, Jack, is that, as you mentioned, it's your team members giving that information. It's your team members sharing best practices. It's a salesperson from one part of the region saying, hey, you know what I do that seems to work? And then all of a sudden, those all get put on paper, and then it becomes the playbook of really how to build the experience. But what I love about it is it comes from your team. It's not us as consultants saying, do this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. It's your team creating that playbook of what's authentic. And that's so important in service and loyalty.
Well, and that's right. You can't stand up on a stage and tell people in the audience, this is what you should do. All you can do is say, these are exemplars. These organizations have done a great job. And the audience, they agree because they've experienced it themselves. These are generally well-known companies. And so as a result of that, this gets people excited about, taking that next step and taking some time. But I've always asked myself, why is it that with all we know, with all the evidence of the linkage between financial performance and especially between sustainable sales growth and the service experience or the customer experience, with all that we know that's true, there's still some people that don't get it. But you know who really does get it? Are salespeople. Yeah. Salespeople are constantly, when we get together with a group of salespeople, they want to know, what do you do that's different, that makes you stand out, that you can show customers you appreciate them before they've ever spent any money with you. And a lot of those things don't cost money. There are things like, common sense things like remembering their name, being engaging to speak to them, being genuinely curious about their business, doing extra research to understand what they're trying to accomplish so that when you come back with proposals or ideas for them to improve, you've already invested in them and paid attention to them. And the reason I think that's true is because salespeople's compensation directly depends in many cases on their ability to win the customer's loyalty before they're a customer, which then causes the customer to buy something or sign a contract or whatever the sales process is. So there in sales, the linkage between growing the business and helping the employee improve their financial performance is tightly tied together. Whereas on the service side of the industry, it's always kind of not quite as important if you sit down with the CFO and talk about where do we make our money. And that's not true, but that's what's perceived. And as we all know, you believe what you perceive. So that's why my job was called Chief Evangelist. My job was to change beliefs. Because until beliefs are changed, nobody's going to change their behavior, right?
That is very true. And, one of the things that we always talk about when I'm out keynoting, I bring up this point very often, that unfortunately, a lot of organizations still see service as an expense, not an investment, right? So sales training is an investment in the sales team. Experience training for your CS reps or whoever it is isn't always viewed as an investment in them or an investment in the organization. A lot of times it's viewed as an expense. And we all know what happens to expenses. Eventually they get redlined and off they go. But one of the things that you bring, Jack, which I think is really fantastic and unique to you, is the fact that you were yourself a tremendous salesperson, as I mentioned when we were starting here, that one of the things I admire about you is your ability to just build relationships, just start a conversation and build a relationship. So you are such a great salesperson and we're an evangelist for your organization. And now here you are speaking on and helping organizations focus on loyalty. So there's a natural tie between sales and service that you just alluded to that I think a lot of organizations don't see. They don't quite get it. They see sales over here and service over here. And there's usually a couple of bad handoffs in between that upset customers along the way. And they don't realize how intertwined the two really are.
Yes. Well, one of the regrets that I have about the term sales is that it just carries a lot of baggage. I never wanted to be a salesperson. I never had sales on my business card till I was 38 years old. And sales just has a bad reputation. It's just a shame. But if we're honest with ourselves, then we just take a little look at history. Business has not been that much of an admired field altogether. Don't you remember being told as you were growing up, you're 18 and you're maybe buying your first car, getting your first loan, and what does your dad tell you? Well, watch out. Those guys will try to scam you. They'll sell you stuff you don't need. And the financing. They'll rip you on the financing. And it was so true. And what was the saying back then? Let the buyer beware.
Right.
That's how business felt about customers. They were fish to be caught and gutted. And a lot of us customers, we got sick of that. And so we started suing customers. Now we have a Consumer Protection Bureau that the government has to create, and they fine billions of dollars at salespeople. And businesses are ripping off from customers. So what's changed over time is, as I said, fortunately, I think we've grown up, and the really good businesses, the thoughtful, the good community members, those who treat their employees and their customers well, like they treat their own families and friends, those businesses have risen to the top. And to be in those businesses and compete, a lot of those management teams they have to get on board. It still might not be in their heart, but they have to get on board. And as long as someone's doing this because they have to, they're never going to get raved about, like you just said. You're never going to say, wow, they're great relationship builders. No, you're going to say they're great con artists or they're smooth talkers. And that's not what we're looking for. We're trying to make it enjoyable to do business. In fact, one of the greatest discoveries, if you boil it down, customer experience is about getting what you want from the experience. And that's true whether it's a hamburger or a sales training course or a massage or a contract to deliver products. Whatever it is, if the customer gets what they want, that's number one. If you don't get what you want, nothing else matters. And then number two is, was it easy to get what you wanted? Was it a hassle or was it easy? Was it simple? And then finally, the pinnacle is this: did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it enough that you might even tell somebody else about it? You would go out of your way to come back to that provider of services. That's why it works in all industries, because did you get the success you came to pay money for? Was it easy and was it enjoyable? That's not specific to a particular industry, is it?
Right. Jack, I'm thinking as we're speaking here, and we're both at our home offices today recording this podcast, because as we're recording this, we're in the middle of COVID-19, and a lot of states have stay-at-home orders in place right now. And as you were talking about building those relationships and how important it is in sales, it got me thinking that if you are an organization that is good at building relationships, you're probably a little more optimistic about the future right now, right? If you already have that in place and now we are virtually and not seeing our customers as much, you're probably feeling a little better about yourselves. And so I'm getting to a question with this one. If you're sitting at home and watching this or listening to this and you're not yet doing a good job of building relationships or focusing on loyalty or even focusing on service at all, I'm just curious if you could share, if someone's thinking to themselves, we got to come out of this and start this as a business, we need to focus on this. What are some of those pitfalls? What are some of the mistakes that you've seen organizations make in your time being an expert in this field that you would recommend someone starting out to try and avoid? What are some of the pitfalls?
I think you're asking me about what are some of the pitfalls of trying to do business in a difficult time, like right now when a lot of people can't do business.
Yeah, I'm asking that, but I'm also wondering, what are some of the pitfalls you've seen organizations go through and the mistakes they've made when they're trying to get to loyalty? What are some of the
Oh,
mistakes that organizations have made when they said,
oh,
yes, we want to do this, and then all of a sudden it's not working the way that they had hoped?
oh, that's an excellent question, and that brings up an example. If I could share this, and by the way, you'll notice also, Dave, there's about the same 3 dozen companies are constantly cited as the exemplars of service. So
Hmm.
Southwest Airlines is one that I actually do business with them so much and experience them so much and have over so many years that I love their loyalty program. And their loyalty program is the reason I love it is number one, I love to do business with them. Why? Well, because they're on time. I got what I wanted. They're easy to do business with, and they're even fun and enjoyable, right? So they meet my requirements now for service on a
Hmm.
plane. So I exclusively buy from Southwest if I can. So when they offer me a loyalty program, it's sometimes referred to, where I kind of get credit for flying them and I get miles, and those miles turn into free flights and things like that. That kind of a loyalty program has been successful as long as the fundamental reason I'm doing their program is because I already fell in love with their business. I'm already a committed customer. What I find is people saying, hey, let's start a loyalty program, which is really simply a financial rewards program. If you do business with us, we'll give you financial rewards. Well, it goes back to remember when you could go to a sandwich shop and you could get a little card and they would clip it each time you bought, and then you'd get the 10th one free. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. That was just a very fundamental loyalty program. They're saying, well, you got to come back. You got to keep coming back to us to get 9. And if you get 9, we know you're coming back for the 10th one that's free. So that attitude toward loyalty is not the same attitude as actually creating a feeling of enjoyment combined with operational excellence where things are done right and it's easy to do business. So I see people make mistakes by going straight to the loyalty program where we're going to have systems by which you can get rewarded for buying from us. And I just think those things are only effective if I already am very committed to you as a customer. And then, heck yes, I'm going to sign up for it. But that's the biggest mistake I see, Dave, is a lot of people using the word loyalty when they really just
Mhm.
mean a rewards program.
That's interesting. I had not thought about it that way, but basically what you're saying is a loyalty program really isn't a great way to get your loyalty, right? You have to earn that first, and then you can supplement it that way. And that's probably counter to a lot of thinking out there.
Yeah, I think thanking people for being a regular customer by giving them things for free, like miles or points or whatever it might be, over time, that itself starts to become another reason why you should be flying on Southwest. I think Delta's pretty good at it too, and JetBlue. So I don't mean to be saying Southwest is the only one,
Hmm.
but that works for me in Kansas City. They're our biggest carrier, and I'm telling you, you start to tell people you work with, oh, you're not flying with Southwest. Do you know if you fly with Southwest, you can get all these free miles and free points. You can even get a companion pass, and your wife or child or somebody can fly with you for $10. And people,
Hmm.
I mean, I hadn't even heard of that. I wasn't looking for a deal. I just used them because they are the best source of that service, right? So anyway, there's a lot of companies that do it well, but there's so many more that think it's a shortcut and they can tack onto that word loyalty that's a buzzword now. And that's not the feeling you're looking for. It should be a thank you to your customers that comes after they've done so much business with you that you almost owe the reciprocal thanks for that.
Hmm. Great point. And so here's my last question for you, Jack. And as you know, coming to the Customer Service Revolution conference in October, you've been there several times. You know that the people that come to our conference are bought into service. They understand the importance of service. That they're leaders of organizations where service is important. But my question for you here is, for those out there that might be listening today or watching us today that are new to this, maybe wanting to embark on a service or loyalty focus in their organization. My question is this: what is some of the feedback that you have gotten from your talks when you share those great stories, those great examples? What are some examples of feedback where people have come back to you and said, I'm so glad you mentioned this. That's how we're going to do this. That's that's the thing that's going to help us get over this hump. That's the small thing that is going to help us get this started, whatever that may be. What's some of that feedback you've heard after being with an audience that where they came to you and said, yeah, thank goodness you mentioned that because we're off and running?
Yeah, sure. One of the best examples comes to my mind is I was talking to an audience, and it was a large audience, so that it had many different types of businesses in it. And using this approach that we've been talking about here, that you have to learn how in your own industry to apply these principles. I'd have people come up to me afterwards, and they would talk about an example I gave them. Like I oftentimes cite Chick-fil-A. I met them at SMG, and I continue to think that they're just a fantastic example of kind of leading from the heart. At the same time, they're brilliant. They use analysis and insights, and they use customer feedback along with operational performance to determine, are they really getting to the perfection that a business can strive to? Well, so people come up to me and they'll say, oh yeah, I love Chick-fil-A for all those reasons too, but I never thought about how I could use some of what they do to develop their employees and make their employees feel special and important. And so I get comments like that. I've had people come up to me and talk about they're in the banking or credit union business. And they say, wow, you made us realize that the really successful credit unions and banks, they all do a lot of the same things. So the difference makers really are the ones that make you feel better about interacting with them. It makes it more interesting or more exciting. Another way I always get feedback on is how, if you want to do a job well, look for ways to make it simple on the employees to deliver what the customers love. And so that gets down more to the operating leaders, is that how can you create systems? And you hear, I'll give examples of other companies and systems that they've created. People will say, wow, that's a great idea. We ought to be doing that. So I get that kind of feedback all the time, and it's rewarding. And also, I tell you, I've had people stand up in the audience and say, what you said about retention, I just got on the phone with some of my people while you were talking, Jack, and I checked our numbers, and we're at like 95% client retention over the last 7 years. And that all started when we decided that we were going to focus on customer loyalty. So this stuff really works. That's the message that I get the most.
It does indeed. And as you mentioned a few times in our conversation, both with external customers, but your internal customers as well, your employees. And that's so important, retention internally and externally. So that's such an important message to get out there.
If I could, I have to, Dave, just say, because I learned this at the Customer Service Revolution. I don't remember what year it was, but one of the executives of a company that presented, and I'm not going to identify the name, but you'll know who it is. He stood up and he said, how can we expect our customers to love us if our employees don't? It can't be done. So,
right.
And then his next thought was, so I realized as a chief executive that I had to step up and scale up my leadership skills, because employee loyalty is an outcome of leadership. So isn't it funny how it all rolls up to the buck stops at the top, but along the way, whether you're running a store, a region, a division, or the whole company, it all comes down to, if the employees aren't feeling important, if they're not feeling empowered to do the right things, and if you haven't got the systems that make it easy to do the things right that they need to do all the time, it'll all be a pipe dream to create outstanding customer loyalty. But the payoff is so huge. I mean, people that are loyalty leaders in every industry, they outperform the industry average by something like double the sales growth rate. And you multiply double the sales growth rate year after year after year after year, and they're just way ahead. So anybody who's planning on being in business 20 years, this is really what they need to be looking at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jack, it was wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you again for making the time to be here on the Customer Service Revolution podcast. And we can't wait to see you at the Customer Service Revolution Conference in October here in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio. It's going to be great to see you again in person and to have you on our stage. You're going to deliver such a great message, especially for those sales folks out there. It's important for them to be in your session. They're going to want to hear that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I should shout out for anybody who's listening who maybe hasn't been to Cleveland. I think that DiJulius Group and that Customer Service Revolution Conference has done more to impress people about the Cleveland metro and how it's changed. It's just unbelievable because Cleveland's kind of got some baggage from years gone by, but Cleveland is a great town now. And I've loved getting to know Cleveland and the DiJulius Group, and I look forward to seeing you all again next year.
Well, thank you, Jack. Likewise, we appreciate that. Can't wait to see you in October. And thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for our show today. Thank you for joining the Customer Service Revolution podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining Dave and Jack on this week's episode. To hear more, subscribe to the Customer Service Revolution podcast now on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Customer Service Revolution.